Hello, my name is Federico Gutierrez, and for option C, I think Julia's identity is shaped pretty heavily by both her social and economic situation. Throughout the novel, she is very aware that her family doesn't have much money, but I think the bigger issue is what that makes her believe about herself and where she belongs. One example is when Julia has to clean houses with Ama. She doesn't just dislike the work itself, she feels embarrassed by it, especially because she is cleaning the homes of people who live completely different lives from hers. She sees the difference between what those families have and what her family has, and it makes her way more aware of her social class. At the same time, though, I think it motivates her. Julia knows she doesn't want that to be her future, which is part of why college and becoming a writer means so much to her. We see something similar in the Salvation Army scene. Julia is embarrassed about having to shop for used clothing because she knows her family can afford the things that some of the other kids can. For her, clothes become more than just clothes. They represent money and social status. She becomes very aware of how other people might see her. That insecurity becomes even more obvious with Connor. Julia really likes him, but she is constantly aware that he comes from a wealthier, mostly white suburban environment. She even worries about how Lorena sees him because Lorena assumes that someone like Connor probably looks down on people like them. Even though Julia defends him, that difference is still in the back of her mind. She wants to belong in Connor's world, but part of her seems to question whether she actually does. I think that also helps explain what Julia calls her word puke. Julia is intelligent and outspoken, but when she feels uncomfortable or judged, she sometimes talks before she can really control what she is saying. A lot of that seems to come from insecurity. She is constantly navigating different expectations, what her family expects from a Mexican daughter, what wealthier people might think of her, and what she actually wants for herself. Her depression makes all of this even heavier. It obviously isn't caused by just one thing. She is grieving Olga, struggling with her family, and dealing with her own mental health. But the social and economic pressure adds another layer because Julia often feels trapped. She wants a different life, but she doesn't always know if that life is actually available to someone like her. That's why I think getting into college at the end is so important. NYU represents more than just school. It represents Julia finally having access to a world that once seemed out of reach. So overall, Julia's social and economic background limits her because it creates shame, insecurity, and expectations about who she is supposed to be. But at the same time, those limitations also push her to fight for something different. By the end, she hasn't forgotten where she comes from. She's just beginning to realize that where she comes from doesn't have to determine where she ends up.